Hey, thanks for stopping back to this episode of my show of shows. I'm going to talk to you this time about my school days. This is going to be part one of two parts. I hated my school days. I'm sure that everyone has mixed feelings about their years in school. And I really don't. Except for a few episodes, my school life was horrid, and an overprotecting, demanding mom made it all that much worse, which no young boy should have to endure. I had only a few friends and had extremely low self-esteem because I felt I could accomplish I felt I could not accomplish anything on my own without her meddling into it. Let's go all the way back though to kindergarten. I went to the last one-room schoolhouse in Saginaw County. It was a circa 1890s red brick building, and after the class I was in was done, there were no more classes held there. Now that wonderful building, which has served also as the Bridgeport Township Hall, is preserved at the Bridgeport Historical Complex, which is there because of my damn hard work, even though I've been denied any recognition for it. When I was 13 years old, started it, and I had the articles to prove it, and it was ripped out of my hands from a very angry old man, and that was William Shoemaker at the time. There were many misunderstandings on his part, but he was he was supposed to be such a good Christian, and he treated me, a young boy, like shit, so he could rob the glory for himself of starting the Bridgeport Historical Society. But I've accomplished a lot more in my life, so let him have that. At any rate, the building was on State Street, and I lived on Shreve Drive, which is only a distance of about 3 blocks. And oddly enough, my upstairs neighbor right now, Jean or Esther Jewell, also went to that same kindergarten class. Really weird that we, after all these decades, ended up living in the same building, at least for a time. I best remember nap time in kindergarten because just before it we had a snack of graham crackers and milk, and I hated white milk, and I still do. And they would not serve chocolate, so I got in trouble quite a few times for not drinking it. But I often gave my white milk to Jean, but I always chowed down on those graham crackers. I remember them as being extremely good. Kids today will never know what a graham cracker actually tastes like, because now it's a lot of genetically modified ingredients go into these Frankenfood products, whereas back when I was a kid it was still the way God made the plants and things that were used to produce our food. But not anymore. Man thinks he's better than God, but man's got a really strong lesson that's going to be learned from the Frankenfoods, I like to call them, those that are genetically modified. But again, that's way off topic, so I'm sorry. From the get-go, my mom kept me out of school a lot, always having some excuse that I was sick, when in fact it was her that was sick. She needed help. For some reason, she was afraid to be in our house alone. No one had ever lived in the house before us. It was built by my dad and grandfather shortly after World War II. But there was something there which frightened her, and that is something I would experience later on, and I'll tell you more about that. First grade is where more of my problems began. My teacher was Mrs. Breidenbach, and she and Mom became very good friends, and even a few times I remember us going over to her house for dinner. First grade was in a 2-story building with a basement, and I believe it's on Grant Street. Now it's used as an administration building, I believe. My class, the restrooms were on the basement level. And I recall one particular day that Mom came to pick me up early at school for some reason. And we walked to school because the school was only about maybe 4 or 5 blocks from our home on Shreve Drive. Before we left the school, I had to use the bathroom. So she walked down to the basement with me, and while I was inside, she apparently was standing guard over the door as I heard her arguing with one of my young classmates. I heard her say, "You can't go in until he comes out." And the boy, whose name I cannot recall, I remember hearing him say, "But I have to go really bad." "Well, you're just going to have to wait," she replied firmly. "But why? I'm a boy. Why can't I go in?" She was like that, and I was really quite embarrassed by those type of stunts, that she pulled in the early years of my life, which really kind of screwed me up for a long time. It made me feel like I was some sort of freak, and all I wanted to be was a normal kid, and using a boy's bathroom, since I was a boy, should not have required her to stand guard over the door. Convinced there was something wrong with me, no matter how difficult, I waited till I was at home to go to the bathroom after that. Her weirdness when it came to me went even further back. My brother Frank was quite a good baseball player, and due to tournaments the team he played on traveled all over the state. And she purposely let my hair grow long and dressed me as a girl to take me to the games. She wanted everyone to think I was her daughter. Well, what kind of a mother does that to their son? What kind of a father lets it happen in the first place? Well, it's a sick thing, in my opinion. School was very trying for me, though, because she used to pay Dr. Shaheen to write notes excusing me from recess because she was certain I would be hurt. And I remember the big windows in my second and third grade classroom. They looked out across the playground, and I would sit at my desk watching the other kids having a great time, but I was supposed by her to be weak and fragile, too much so to do normal things. And this really, as the years went by, caused a lot of trouble and emotional problems. So I don't have many good memories of my school years. Really, I don't. But I have those very early years, just kind of like fleeting memories with no friends, or as I was not really allowed to have friends, with the exception of Marty May, who lived across and somewhat kitty corner across from the road from me, but his family moved away before you know, too much into the school beginning school years. One time my teacher, I think her name was Mrs. Butler, violated my mom's main rule and saw me at recess with my head down on my desk and felt some compassion for me. She got her jacket on and said, "Come on, you need to get some good fresh air." And I was excited, so I threw on my jacket and out we went. She let me get over by the boys' baseball game to watch, and one kid hit the ball, and he threw the bat, and guess what? It hit me square between the eyes. It knocked me down, and before I knew it, I was in the school nurse's office. Damn the luck, and poor Mrs. Butler. Mom caused a lot of problems for her after that happened, because she violated the doctor's note that my mother paid for. Strange the things that parents will do to their kids, especially in their early formative years. Things got moderately better in junior high, for a short while anyways. I had a few more friends, most sort of misfits like myself, but I had a certain ambition and drive for things I liked. I loved history and writing, and even though our school already had a newspaper, I wanted to start one of my own. I had to find a catch, though, or the school principal would not approve a second paper. Bridgeport Junior High had an experimental class I think it was 6th grade, called the Occupational Survey class, which was intended to help us decide about what career our lives would take. And it was pretty interesting, too, really. One thing I enjoyed writing about at that point was the history of Bridgeport Township, but there was no place to have the stuff published. I might add, I had always loved history and antiques from the youngest time I can remember, but at this time what really pushed me ahead in my desire to learn history, local history and family histories and stuff, was Dark Shadows on TV, which we wove its storyline through many periods of time, and it was a wonderful show. So anyways, I came up with the idea to do a newspaper which would focus on occupations, which might let me publish my story series on Bridgeport history. I even picked out the title, The Occupational Observer. Now I just had to get the teacher of the class sold on my idea. I and a group of my fellow misfits assembled and met with the occupational survey teacher during one particular lunch period. I remember my crew well. There was Dwight McNally, who was from a very well-to-do family in Bridgeport, and there was Bonnie Taylor, who claimed that she was the direct descendant of President Zachary Taylor. And then there was Melody Chapman, Tim Basner, and Bob Getz. The teacher took my plan to the school board, and they gave the go-ahead, and we began our work. I used the Occupational Observer to publish that series of articles I had written about the history of Bridgeport, where I lived. And there were 3 articles in the paper a monthly only published 3 issues because of how late in the school year I began. But it led to some interesting, really interesting opportunities for me. For a kid my age, I think they were somewhat remarkable. My interest in the township's history began getting around. Older residents began giving me things such as old photos, letters, and much, much more. I remember one elderly lady, a Mrs. Edna Kennedy, who gave me a great miniature collection, which is now presumably housed at the museum in Bridgeport, or it should be anyways. I say it should be because a teacher whom I trusted ended up taking a lot of the items from me, which were to go to the Historical Society. And then instead of taking them to the Historical Society building, which was at that time at the old fire hall, he sold them, making some people like Mr. Shoemaker very angry at me because he thought in particular that I stole them and I wouldn't, or that I was keeping them for myself and wouldn't share them with him, when in fact I had donated them. But more about that a little bit later on. Mrs. Kennedy lived on State Street, and I'm not sure how I met her, but I didn't know her well. But one day, as we were visiting, she brought out a very old mahogany folding lap desk, a really beautiful piece, and I knew it was old, and she gave it to me. And it was from the Civil War, and had belonged to a Hatton Beach, whom she was related to. And with the desk, she gave me a beautifully framed hand-colored tin type of Hatton Beach in his full Civil War uniform. Opening the desk, I found many personal items which had belonged to Mr. Beach. This desk had traveled with him while he served the Union. The only item I remember real well was a silver bar with mint marks and other numbers stamped into it. It was about 3 inches long and was probably an inch and a half thick. As more and more items were given to me, I had assembled quite a collection. I don't know how the idea came to me, but I decided I wanted to hold an historical display where people could come in and look at these items. I consulted with the junior high school librarian, a Mrs. Draves, and she knew a Mr. and Mrs. Baxter who owned a storefront in Bridgeport which was empty and right on the Dixie Highway. It had formerly housed a florist shop called the Flower Box, and she agreed to ask them to allow me to have the building for a week-long display of all the artifacts and relics that I had been given. While all that was going on, another amazing opportunity came my way, one that I was always very excited about. It was 1969, and a weekly newspaper had been started by the J.C.'s, and it was called the Bridgeport Future, and it had been started in the summer of 1968. The newspaper's first anniversary was approaching, and in May of 1969, I was contacted by Elaine Jackson and Sandy Warner of the paper. They wanted to have the publisher, staff, and several advertisers meet me for a business lunch at the High Life Inn on the Dixie, which was a really nice restaurant and was a rather expensive restaurant. And I was 14 then, and I guess in a way I was getting a bit of a big head, which caused me part of the problems with my peers. Kids my age just were not into these sorts of things. And as all this took shape, my school offered to let me teach a special class on local history, but I can't really remember if I did that or not. Anyway, I went to the luncheon at the High Life Inn, and the publisher asked me if I would write the complete first anniversary issue of the newspaper as a history of Bridgeport Township, and I jumped at the chance. The anniversary issue would be published in August 1969, so I had June and all of July to get it ready to present to them, and I also had some great photographs to go along with my history. My mom sort of took the fun out of it and blasted my self-esteem by thinking she could do a better job than I, and she might have been able to. She was an adult. But so I insisted on writing much of it and letting me take the credit. But what finally appeared in that August 1969 anniversary issue was all mine. And after that was published, until I moved from Bridgeport in 1971, I wrote a weekly historical column for the paper. Back to the history display, though. The Baxters agreed to let me use their building for 2 weeks. The display was 1 week, and the extra time was for setting up and breaking down. They gave me the key and the go-ahead. My memories of that display are just like short clips. Mike Howe, a sort of neighbor about my age, somewhat of a good artist, agreed to paint a map of Bridgeport from the 1890s on the huge display front window, and he did a really great job. Mom was there every day, and for all her faults, she did have some pride in me and what I was accomplishing. I honestly only remember Dad being there once. He really didn't know what to make of me, and we didn't have much of a relationship because of that. Dad was very mechanically oriented, and I was more creative. We really had no common ground as I was growing up. Well, we really didn't later in life either, though I ended up being the child who cared for him till about a week before he passed. While the display was open, I got out of school one day so I could show various classes through the display, and then WNEM came out and did some nice coverage with Jim Rush and Mark Wesley being the reporters. Mark Wesley lived in Bridgeport, and he was the sports reporter for WNEM, and Jim Rush handled regular news. It was an exciting time for me. I met a Mr. Peter Willox, who had an ad agency in Saginaw, but lived not far from me in Bridgeport. He took a real interest in me, which oddly pissed off my dad, because my dad really didn't have much of an interest in me or what I did. One day, again, I got out of school as Mr. Willox took me to his office for the day and then out to lunch with him and his partner. I remember being shown that day the basics of animation, how that was done. We ate at the Fordney Hotel, which is long since gone, and the Willoxes were awesome people. Well, I guess that's about it for this show of shows, but remember, next time I will continue to tell you about my school days and growing up in Bridgeport, Michigan in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Thanks for stopping by.